The wine was sweet. Too sweet. Dana had topped off my glass 3 times already. She called it a thank you for all the years you gave this family. But the aftertaste clung like syrup. Too smooth. Too practiced. Before I explain why my grandson's whisper saved everything I've built, let me know where you're watching from. And subscribe if you believe legacy should never be stolen, even by your own child. I held the glass by its stem, knuckles white. Across the table, Patrick laughed too hard at a joke no one repeated. He kept glancing down the hall, quick flicks of the eye. Measured. Waiting. Even with the air conditioner running, my collar stuck to my neck. The lamb on my plate bled slightly into the mashed potatoes. I don't remember asking for lamb. I don't remember much from that dinner, except the feeling. Dana's smile was frozen butter. Her voice too high. She refilled my glass again, without asking. Patrick lifted his hand as if to say something, then dropped it. I looked to Nathan, my grandson, quiet beside me. 17, always polite. No earbuds, no screen, just still. His fork hadn't touched the food. I reached for my water glass. That's when he leaned close. His voice barely above breath. "Grandma, you need to go. Now." My heart stopped for one beat, then another. The water glass clinked against the edge of the plate. I turned toward him. He was already looking down, napkin folded neat in his lap. Dana asked something about the orchard. I didn't hear it. Or maybe I did. But my ears had gone full of wind. Then again. Lower. Urgent. Please. Now. I looked at Patrick. He checked his watch again. Dana stood to refill the wine. Even though mine was full, something in my spine clicked. Not panic. Not fear. Just knowing. I folded my napkin, placed it on the edge of my plate, stood. The chair scraped across the floor like a warning. "Thank you for dinner," I said. "I need to step out." Dana's masquerade smile twitched. Patrick sat stiff. Nathan didn't move. I walked, out the room, out the house, into the night. Lavender, cut grass. Warm air that didn't cling. I didn't look back. Would you have trusted him too? The orchard didn't start big. Just 3 plum saplings. Jack planted them the spring after Patrick was born. He dug the holes by hand. Bare palms, blistered knuckles, sleeves rolled to the elbow. I remember the smell of cut earth and gasoline from the tiller. The baby monitor clipped to my belt crackled with static as I watered. It was quiet back then, quieter than now. No phones. Just Jack's voice and the old AM radio, playing Conway Twitty through the open window. We couldn't afford much. But we had time. And time, back then, felt rich. We stored tools in an old metal shed Jack welded together. The door squeaked like a barn owl every time it opened. He meant to fix it. Never did. I used to make lunch from whatever was left in the pantry. Tuna on dry bread. Boiled eggs with too much salt. We'd sit on upside, down buckets, sweat dripping into our paper plates. One summer, a neighbor's cow wandered in and trampled the corner row. Jack cursed under his breath, then built a fence out of leftover roofing tin. It looked terrible. Still stands. I miss the way he hummed when pruning. Never full songs. Just the same few notes. Over and over, like a hymn only he remembered. In the evenings, when the wind blew west, the orchard smelled like baked sugar and wet leaves. That scent lives in my skin. Patrick learned to walk between those trees. Fell once and scraped his chin on the mulch. Cried so hard he hiccuped. I held him to my chest. Felt the thud of his small heart against mine. Jack picked him up that night, dirt still under his nails. "This one's tougher than he looks," he said. Patrick smiled, toothless and red-eyed. We didn't know then what would change. I didn't know the hands that planted plum roots would someday sign deeds I never approved. Didn't know the boy who called me Mama, with sticky fingers would learn to look through me. Learn to calculate. But that's not this part of the story. Not yet. This part is just the quiet, the orchard, and the way it used to feel like home. Jack passed in the fall. He'd just come in from pruning the far row. Still had his gloves on. Sap stained the leather. He said his chest felt tight. Thought it was heartburn. We never made it to the hospital. After the funeral, I sat in the orchard for hours. The trees had started to yellow. The wind carried the smell of bruised fruit and damp wood. I remember pressing my palm to the dirt, as if I could still feel his weight walking past. Neighbors brought casseroles. Church ladies offered prayers. But nights stayed long. The house creaked in places Jack used to fill. Patrick came by often that first year. He helped fix the barn roof. Tried to trim the hedges. He wasn't good with tools, never had Jack's hands. But he tried. Then came Dana. Bright smile, firm handshake, perfume too strong. She called the orchard quaint. The set I should think about, modernizing the space. The first time she brought up selling, I laughed. I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. They got engaged that winter. The wedding was quick. I offered to host it under the trees. Lanterns, folding chairs, something simple. Dana booked a country club instead. After that, things began to shift. Little things. Patrick stopped fixing things himself. Started sending his guy for repairs. Dana brought spa teas instead of my sun tea. Said I should take it easy at my age. They stopped walking through the orchard altogether. Too many bugs. Too much dust. When I mentioned starting a new row in Jack's memory, Patrick smiled and changed the subject. Dana checked her phone. The space between us thickened, like humidity before a storm. I told myself they were just busy, building their own life. But sometimes, when I sat on the porch and saw their car pass the drive without stopping, I wondered. I wondered what Jack would have said, what he would have seen that I was too hopeful to notice. I began to keep records. Banknotes, old tax receipts, original deeds Jack and I had signed back when our hands were steadier. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I was learning not to ignore small silences. And the orchard, it kept growing, even when they didn't look. Especially then. The house was dark when I returned, not empty, just hollow. I didn't turn on the lights right away. Let the screen door click shut behind me. Listen to the creak of floorboards under my shoes. The air inside smelled like dust and dried lemon balm, same as it had for decades. Same as the morning Jack kissed me goodbye and said, "Don't forget the irrigation valve." I set my purse on the counter, then took off my shoes. Old habit. Jack hated footprints on the kitchen tile. The silence settled around me like a worn quilt. I opened the cupboard. Pulled down the ceramic jar we'd bought at that fair in Claremore. Still held a dozen clothespins and 2 folded checks from the feed store. Tucked beneath them, the map, hand-drawn, faded pencil lines tracing every row, every route. Jack's handwriting in the margins. Planted March '82. Remove weak tree near fence. Patrick's fall. Broken tooth. Strong chin. I ran my fingers over the notations. The paper soft with age. Soaked in 100 seasons of sweat and hope. At the edge of the table sat my small writing pad. I pulled it closer. Uncapped the pen. Paused. It had been years since I'd written a real letter. But the words came steady. "Dear Mr. Corwin, I hope you remember me. Elaine Reynolds, Jack's widow. We spoke years ago when drawing up the first deed. I may need your help again. Quietly for now." I stopped. Listened. Nothing. No Dana voice calling from the front door. No Patrick footfalls up the drive. Just the orchard outside. Breathing. Still there. I folded the letter. Slid it into an envelope. Laid it atop the kitchen table, centered. Like a stone in the water. Then I made tea. Loose leaves, 1 spoon of honey. Carried it to the porch, where the air still held the scent of fallen fruit and the far-off cry of a barn owl. I watched the horizon. Somewhere out there, Nathan was still awake, still wondering if I'd listened. I had, and now I was thinking, not just about the past, but about what happens when a woman remembers everything she built and decides not to give it away. The invitation came in a text from Patrick. Swing by Saturday around 4. Dana's hosting something light. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. No, "Hi Mom." No, "Looking forward to seeing you." Oh, just instructions. Still, I baked the apple crisp. Same one Jack loved. Added extra cinnamon, just in case Patrick remembered. Their house was all sharp lines and gray furniture. No curtains. No clutter. No sound except the hum of something mechanical behind the walls. Dana greeted me in heels, one hand still holding her phone. You made it, she said, eyes scanning the dessert dish. Oh, homemade. She didn't say thank you, just pointed toward the kitchen. That way. There were already 6 people gathered around their island. All young, polished, laughing too loudly at things I couldn't quite follow. I placed the apple crisp near the end of the counter. No one noticed. Patrick handed me a glass of water. No ice. Just lukewarm and plain. Glad you could come, he mumbled, already turning to refill someone's drink. I found a stool in the corner and sat quietly, let the conversation wash over me. Index funds. Crypto pivots. AI property valuations. Dana was in her element. She wore a fitted blazer and spoke like someone who'd just come from a TED Talk. Words like liquidity and diversification danced from her lips. Then it happened. One of her friends asked about estate planning. Dana laughed lightly, waved a manicured hand. Oh, goodness. Some folks still think a shoebox full of paper deeds counts as strategy. Laughter rippled. Especially when the land's sentimental, not even profitable. Someone said, like a hobby farm. Dana shrugged. Or a plum orchard with no scalability. My throat tightened. I didn't move, didn't blink. Nathan was at the edge of the room, leaning against the wall. He looked at me, then looked away. I took a sip of water. Felt the burn of something not hot. My orchard. Jack's orchard. Our life in rows. Turned into a punchline at a kitchen island. I smiled, just slightly. That kind of smile that keeps everything from spilling over, and sat still. I remembered the first time I took Patrick to the bank. He must have been 7, maybe 8. Still had a cowlick he refused to calm down. He stood beside me at the teller window, swinging his legs while I deposited our grocery money. $15.72, all in singles and coins. He asked me what a ledger was. I showed him. He nodded like it mattered. The teller smiled at him and said, "Looks like someone's learning how to save." And I told her, "He's learning how to stand still." Back then, we had nothing fancy, just 2 savings envelopes under the mattress and 1 account at First Farmers. No apps, no portfolios, just discipline. Now, Dana calls it outdated. Like it's embarrassing to believe in cash, in land you can touch, in roots that stay where you put them. She doesn't know I still keep every receipt from the co-op, that I balance my checkbook in pen with a ruler to keep the lines straight. She doesn't know that orchard land paid for Patrick's braces, his camp, his first car, that Jack and I skipped birthdays for a decade so he could have choices. The laughter at the island quieted, but the echo stuck. I glanced again at Nathan. He wasn't laughing. He was looking at Dana like he was studying something sharp and shiny, something that could cut. He caught my eye, and didn't look away this time. A small thing, but enough. I stood slowly, the stool legs scraping just slightly. Walked to the kitchen to rinse my empty water glass. No one followed. The apple crisp sat untouched. Dana had covered it with plastic wrap like it was something too sweet, too messy for their table. I looked around that room, gray, polished, cold, and I thought, if I let them laugh this version of me into silence, I'd disappear. Not all at once, but piece by piece, memory by memory, root by root, and someday, when they stood at the edge of my orchard with contracts in hand, they'd wonder how the trees knew not to bloom for them. Because land remembers. And so do I. It started with the cabinet. The one Jack built himself, oak frame, brass hinges, bottom drawer that always stuck. I wasn't looking for anything, just meant to file the gas bill. But when I slid the drawer open, the folder labeled, Reynolds Property Deed, sat at an odd angle. Not where I left it, not how I left it. I pulled it out, flipped it open. The deed was there, mostly. But the second page, the one with my full signature and Jack's in black ink, was a copy. Not the original, no embossing, no seal. Just a flat, faint reproduction. And the name, Patrick Reynolds, had been added in a new line. Typed, clean. I set the folder on the kitchen table, ran my fingers over the paper. The surface was too smooth. Too new. My stomach dropped, like the moment you miss the last step in the dark. I walked to the phone. The landline buzzed in my hand as I dialed First Farmers. Still had their number memorized. The woman who answered had a voice like dry toast. I gave her my name, my parcel number, and asked when the last inquiry on the deed had been made. She paused, clicked something on her end, then cleared her throat. Looks like a view request was processed last week, via secure login from a connected party. My mouth went dry. I didn't make that request. Silence on her end. Not long. But enough. Would you like to schedule a review with a representative, Mrs. Reynolds? No apology. No curiosity. Just that voice, paper, flat, polite. I thanked her, hung up, stood in the middle of the kitchen. The floor felt cold under my socks. I walked to the sink. Ran the tap until the water turned warm. Then cold again. That file had been untouched for years. Not even Patrick had a key to the cabinet. Jack never gave him one. The window above the sink showed the edge of the orchard, quiet and unmoved. But something inside me shifted. Not rage, not yet. But something older. Older than betrayal, older than ink. The knowing. The same knowing I'd felt the day Jack collapsed on the porch, and I ran barefoot through the frost to get help. I didn't have proof yet. But I had something deeper. And that would be enough to begin. I pulled out the rest of the folder. Stapled to the back, a recent valuation notice from the county assessor. Folded once, creased sharp. Postmarked 2 weeks ago. I hadn't seen it before. My name was printed at the top. But the mailing address had been changed. Redirected to Patrick's office suite across town. Someone had opened this before me. Carefully. Deliberately. The valuation had jumped. Nearly double from the last review. Prime development zone, it said. High growth potential. Lines of numbers. Projected use. Parcel ready. I remembered the old real estate man who showed up last spring. Said he was just admiring the view. I offered him lemonade. He left a card I never called. I unfolded the assessment again. There, in the notes, potential subdivision. Submitted by authorized party. Authorized. I felt the ground tilt. I went to the hallway and opened the locked file drawer. Inside, the older assessments, yellowing at the edges, all with my signature in blue ink. Everyone addressed to this house. My house. I lined them up across the table. Old values, current jump. Someone had plans. Someone had moved fast. And someone thought I wouldn't notice. I sat for a long while. Tea went cold. The kitchen clock ticked too loud. Then I opened my address book. The paper one, faded tabs, notes in Jack's handwriting next to names now long gone. Under C. I found it. He, Harold Corwin. You, sir, real estate attorney. Used to be Jack's bowling partner. I dialed. It rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. Corwin residence. Harold. It's Elaine Reynolds. A beat. Then. Well, I'll be. Haven't heard your voice in years. I'm sorry to call like this, but I think I need help. He didn't ask why. Didn't rush me. Just said, all right, talk slow. So I did. I told him about the cabinet, the deed, the valuation letter. He asked a few questions, voice calm but sharper now. Told me what to photocopy, what to scan. And Elaine, he added, don't sign anything, no matter who hands it to you. I haven't, I said. Good, then we still have room to move. I hung up, hands cold, mind clear. I gathered the papers, slid them into a manila envelope, and placed it inside the drawer Jack had built with his own hands. Then I turned off the kitchen light, walked down the hall, and didn't look back. Whatever they'd started, they didn't know who they were dealing with. Not yet. I went out early, before the sun burned off the dew. The orchard shimmered silver under the morning mist. Soft light slipped between the branches. Each plum leaf held its own secret. Quiet. Still. I walked the same path Jack always took. A gravel crunching under my soles, mud damp around the edges of the rows. The kind of cold that seeps through socks. At the far corner stood the bench he built. Simple cedar, no paint. Just smooth from years of elbows and silence. I sat slowly. The wind carried a hint of honeysuckle. One all still called out in the distance, stubborn against daylight. I closed my eyes. Let it wrap around me. That bench knew things. Knew the weight of decisions, the pressure of grief, the aching stillness of waiting. I thought about calling Nathan. then decided against it. What would I say? You saw what they're trying to do. You warned me once. I should have listened sooner. But before the words could settle in my chest, I heard footsteps, soft, hesitant, behind me. I turned. Nathan. He didn't wave. Didn't speak right away. He just stood there, hands in the pockets of that ratty gray hoodie he wore too often. Then slowly, he stepped closer, pulled something from his back pocket. A plain white envelope, no name on the front, bent at the corners. He held it out. I found this in Dad's desk, he said. Voice quiet, almost too quiet. I looked at the envelope. Didn't reach for it yet. Why bring it to me? I asked. He shrugged. Didn't meet my eyes. I don't know. I thought you should see it. I took it from his hand. Inside, a photocopy of a form I recognized immediately. Power of attorney. Blank. Unsigned, but with my name already typed in. Patrick listed as agent. The air shifted. I folded it back up, placed it on my lap. Didn't speak for a while. Nathan sat beside me, not asking anything more. We stayed that way, two bodies on old cedar, watching sunlight filter through plum trees as if nothing was wrong at all. Nathan didn't fidget, didn't check his phone. Just sat, elbows on knees, staring at the dirt. The bench creaked under our weight. Or maybe it was just age catching up with cedar. I turned the envelope in my hand, feeling the software of corners, the faint texture where fingers had pressed too long. Not his. Patrick's. How long have you known? I asked, voice low. Nathan exhaled through his nose. It's been sitting in Dad's drawer for a few weeks. I saw it the first time when I was looking for printer ink. He kicked a pebble into the grass. Didn't look at me. I didn't think much of it at first, he said. But then he started talking about your birthday. I tilted my head. Talking how? Nathan shrugged. Just stuff. Like how he and Mom wanted to make it special this year. Said it was important we all be there. And that you'd feel safe and open to conversation. I smiled, though nothing about it felt funny. Safe? I repeated. Nathan looked up then. Eyes like Patrick's but softer, more watchful. I think they're planning something, Grandma. Not just a party. They want you to sign something. I heard Mom on the phone with a notary. That word sank. Not fast, not loud, just firm. Did they say what it was? I asked. He shook his head. No, but Dad said. She'll sign it. She always does eventually. I felt my spine stiffen. Always does. Nathan didn't see the way my hands clenched. Or if he did, he pretended not to. He stared out toward the trees. I don't want to be in the middle of this. I know, I said gently. You shouldn't have to be. We sat for another minute. Birdsong returned. Somewhere, a bee hummed past us. Nathan, I said. Thank you. He nodded. Didn't say more. I slipped the envelope into the pocket of my sweater. Let it settle against my ribs. There was no rage, no heat, just stillness. But underneath, a quiet thread pulling tight. They thought age made me slow, soft, easy to shape. But I had roots deeper than paper, longer than Patrick's plans. Let them bring their cake and candles. Let them bring pens and papers. I'd bring silence. And a memory sharper than any signature. They told me it was a small dinner, just family. A quiet night to celebrate turning 72. I arrived 5 minutes early. Old habit. Brought cornbread in a towel-lined basket, still warm. Dana opened the door in heels too high for standing, let alone cooking. Perfect timing. She beamed. Everyone's just getting here. Her perfume hit me before the warmth of her voice. Sharp, floral, expensive. Inside, the house didn't smell like food. No garlic, no onions, no roasting meat. Just citrus candles and something sterile. Patrick greeted me with a half hug. Glad you made it, he said, but his eyes were somewhere else. There were strangers in the living room. Well-dressed, shiny teeth. One woman held a clipboard. Another wore a suit and nodded too much. Dana ushered me toward the dining table. Have a seat. Patrick wants to show you something later. Big surprise upstairs. She grinned like a politician. Then poured me a glass of wine without asking. Chardonnay, not my favorite. I held the glass, didn't sip. Let it warm in my palm. The dining room had changed, new art, new chairs, a long runner down the middle of the table, like they'd staged a magazine shoot. Nathan was already there, hands folded in his lap. He didn't smile, but his eyes met mine, a small nod. That was all. As people trickled in, the noise swelled. Clinks of crystal, bursts of laughter too sharp. No one asked me anything. Not about the orchard. Not about Jack. Not even about the cornbread. Dana floated from guest to guest. Patrick kept checking his watch. At 6:45, he clapped his hands. "Dinner's ready!" "But before we eat, Mom, can I borrow you for a second?" I felt every head turn. Felt Dana's hand on my shoulder. "She hasn't seen the upstairs since the renovation," she said. "Wait till you see the new fixtures." I stood. My knees didn't shake. Not yet. The woman with the clipboard smiled at me. The suited man stepped aside to make a path. I walked toward the stairs. Each step was deliberate. I remembered the envelope in my sweater drawer, the phone call to Harold, the taste of lemon balm tea the night I didn't sleep. I climbed slowly. Patrick led the way. Dana behind me, flanked. At the top, he opened the guest bedroom door. "After you," he said. I paused, then stepped inside, and saw the folder, closed. Thick, resting on the desk under the window. The room was staged, fresh flowers in a crystal vase. A bottle of wine chilled in silver. 3 glasses, already poured. The papers sat neatly inside a leather folder, just out of reach but clearly visible. Everything about the space whispered planned. Dana stepped in behind me. Closed the door with a soft click. That sound, soft, final, made something shift in my chest. Patrick gestured toward the chair by the desk. "Set, Mom. No pressure. We just wanted to go over some options." "Options?" I repeated. Dana moved to the other side of the room, leaned against the wall like a therapist trying not to look like one. "It's nothing binding," she said. "Just an overview. We thought it might make things easier down the line. For all of us," Patrick added. I said nothing, just sat. Let the wine glass remain untouched. Patrick opened the folder, pulled out the first page. Power of attorney. Prepared, printed, with tabs marked in yellow. He slid it forward. His tone softened. "You've been doing everything alone, Mom. Bills, property stuff, the orchard. We just want to help." I looked at the page. Didn't touch it. Dana stepped closer. "Imagine not having to stress about paperwork anymore," she said. "You can just enjoy things." The word, enjoy, landed like dust. "You'd keep the house." "Of course," Patrick offered. "We'd just handle the rest. Tax filings, property renewals, the legal stuff." Their voices were calm, measured, polite. But I knew control when I saw it dressed in manners. I picked up the pen on the desk. Rolled it between my fingers. Its weight surprised me. "I thought this was a birthday dinner," I said softly. Patrick smiled. "It is." Dana handed me the top sheet. "The first part just confirms we discussed it. Nothing binding." That phrase again. I looked up. And behind Patrick's shoulder, Nathan. He stood in the doorway, saying nothing. But his eyes locked on mine. He shook his head. Once, slow, I breathed in, set the pen down beside the folder, lifted the wine glass instead, held it midair, didn't drink, then placed it gently on the desk. "Maybe not tonight," I said. Dana's face tightened. Patrick blinked. "I'll need more time," I added. "And better light." I stood, smoothed my skirt, walked to the door. Nathan stepped aside, silent. I didn't look back. If someone handed you a pen and called it love, would you sign? Let me know below, and subscribe if you believe silence isn't weakness. It's preparation. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Just drifted in and out, listening to the house breathe around me. At 4:00 a.m., I gave up, wrapped myself in Jack's old flannel, padded into the kitchen, and turned on the lamp above the sink. Its yellow glow reached only halfway across the counter. Just enough. The folder from the party sat where I'd left it, beside a half-finished cup of tea gone cold. I opened it again. The documents weren't complicated. Too simple, in fact. Standard language, clean formatting, no typos, which meant someone had reviewed them carefully. I flipped to the second section. Buried there, a clause assigning decision, making authority for Non-liquid property holdings. That meant the orchard. I pulled out my glasses. Read it again and again. There was a draft of a transfer authorization, blank signature lines, but every other field filled in. Legal description of land, parcel ID, assumed valuation, all tied to Patrick's business entity, registered just 4 months ago. They hadn't mentioned that over dinner. I closed the folder, set it aside, stared out the window where the first blue of morning pressed against the glass. Then I went to the study. My printer hummed softly in the corner. I hadn't used it in weeks, but the tray held a single sheet, fresh, warm. Transfer authorization execute Monday was typed at the top. No logo, no letterhead, just bold, centered text. And beneath it, a space for initials. My initials. I didn't print it. I unplugged the machine, went to the file cabinet, pulled out everything I had on the land. Original titles, tax ledgers, Jack's handwritten notes. Spread them across the desk like a quilt of proof. Then I reached for the phone. Harold answered after one ring. "You up already?" he asked. I never went down. I told him what I'd found. He listened, didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said, "Time to move." I thought so too. He gave me a time. Monday 10 a.m., bring everything. Originals if you can. I hung up, left the papers where they lay, went outside barefoot. The grass was cold, sharp at the edges, but honest. And under the plum trees, I stood still long enough to feel what they'd tried to erase. The law office hadn't changed much. Same scuffed tile, same framed photo of Harold shaking hands with a county judge back in 1987. The receptionist offered me coffee I didn't take. I wanted this over with a clear head. Harold came out from his office, suspenders tight across his chest, glasses hanging from a cord around his neck. "Elaine," he said, voice low but warm, "come on back." His desk was clean, always was, just a notepad, 2 pens, and a small brass lamp. I handed him the folder, then the printed sheet from my study. He didn't speak for several minutes. Just flipped page by page, brow furrowing a little more with each turn. Halfway through, he let out a short breath. "That clause on page 3, I nodded. "It's written to look harmless. It's not. It gives them power to act on your behalf without further notice." I said nothing. He continued, slower this time. "Most of these documents are drafted to be signed casually. Over dinner, maybe." He looked up. I met his eyes. "I didn't sign," I said. "Good." He reached for the notepad. "Here's what we're going to do." First, he drafted a formal revocation of any prior authority, verbal or otherwise, granted to Patrick or Dana. He had me initial every margin. Then sign. Next came the updated will, short, firm, clear. I named Nathan as primary beneficiary, no shares, no confusion, just one stipulation. He must never transfer or sell the orchard. Only pass it down or give it back to the land. Harold read it back to me, word for word. I didn't change a thing. Then he looked over his glasses. "You still have joint access on the operating account." "I do. For now," he said, and slid a document across the desk. "Account separation, 1 signature, 2 witnesses. No drama. Once this is filed," he said, "they won't be able to touch a cent tied to that land. Or you." I signed. He gathered the stack, tapped it into order, then leaned back in his chair. "They'll know you moved first," he said. "They'll try something else." I nodded. "I expect they will." Harold studied me for a moment, then asked, "Are you ready to make this official?" I smiled, the kind of smile that comes slow, like something warming in your chest after a long freeze. "I was born ready," I said. "Just didn't know it until last week." Outside, the wind had picked up, the kind that tossed old leaves across courthouse steps. As I stepped out onto the sidewalk, I felt it. A lightness I hadn't carried in years, not relief, but readiness. That night, I left the window open, just a crack, enough to let the orchard in. The wind smelled of bruised plums and dry grass. Familiar. A scent I'd known longer than my own reflection. I didn't double, check the locks, didn't pace the hallway, didn't hover over the drawer where Harold's folder now rested. I just changed into Jack's old sleep shirt, the one with the missing button near the hem, and climbed into bed. The mattress groaned. The fan clicked once. And then, nothing. No what-ifs, no numbers repeating in my head, no imagined voices behind closed doors, just sleep. Heavy, quiet, real, and a dream. Jack sat beneath the second to last tree in the south row. Cedar bench, boots crossed at the ankle, wrists resting on his knees. He didn't speak, didn't need to. He just looked at me, tilted his chin slightly, and nodded once. I wanted to ask what he meant, what to do next. But the wind picked up and carried the question away. When I opened my eyes, it was barely morning. Light pressed gentle fingers against the curtains. The house was still. I stayed there a while, flat on my back, listening. The birds were louder than usual. Or maybe I was just finally quiet enough to hear them. Eventually, I stood, padded barefoot to the kitchen, turned on the radio. The AM crackled. Some preacher talking about the Book of Ruth. I didn't change the station. Just boiled water, dropped in a pinch of lemon balm from the jar above the stove, and poured myself a mug. I carried it to the porch. The bench cushions were sun-faded but soft. The wood warm from where the sun had already touched. I sipped slow, watched the light shift across the orchard. Saw a squirrel leap between trees. Felt the porch creak beneath me. Old bones greeting mine. I didn't think about signatures, or folders, or strategy. Just roots, and breath, and the sound of leaves remembering who they belonged to. I kept the note folded in a recipe book. Tucked between pages for blueberry pie and corn pudding sat Jack's handwriting. Crooked, all caps, a little smudged from time. Don't defend your life. Live it so it defends itself. He wrote it after a rough season. The year the well went dry, and we nearly sold the south acre. I didn't agree with him back then. Thought it was a nice line. A little too proud. Too stubborn. Now I understood. That morning, with the orchard still humming from night, I pulled out a clean sheet of paper. The kind we used to keep for thank you notes. My hand shook slightly as I started. Not from fear. Not from anger. From care. I didn't copy Harold's language. Didn't use legal terms or clauses. I wrote what I needed the land to hear. Who I was. Who had shaped it. What it meant to live in rows planted by hand, not bought by check. I named Nathan. By his full name. Spelled it twice. I wrote, this place is not to be flipped, listed, marketed, or scaled. It is to be walked. It is to be worked, and when the plums ripen, it is to be shared. I signed it, dated it, folded it slowly. Then I wrote another letter. This one shorter, only a few lines. Dear Nathan, if this ever finds you opened, something has shifted. Whatever you do next, remember that silence is not the same as surrender. Some things we protect not by holding tight, but by knowing when to let go. Grandma. I placed both pages inside a blank envelope. No markings. Just his name on the front in pencil. Then I slid it into the hollow of the old bread box beneath the gingham cloth Jack insisted we never throw out. A man needs one thing in a kitchen he picked himself. I stood there a long time. Hand resting on the wood, eyes on nothing. Then I put the kettle back on, refilled my cup, and went to the porch to finish my tea. The leaves had started to rustle, and the trees. They didn't know the details. But they knew something had changed. They showed up just after lunch. No call, no warning, just the crunch of tires on gravel and the low hum of an engine cutting off too fast. I was rinsing peaches in the sink. Through the window, I saw Patrick get out first. Tie loose, jaw set. Dana followed, phone in one hand, sunglasses still on though the clouds had rolled in. I dried my hands on the dish towel, folded it once, then again, and opened the door before they could knock. Mom, Patrick said. Too quickly, just checking in. Dana smiled, not with her mouth. Just the stretch of skin where her lips used to be. Well, we figured since you hadn't answered messages. She trailed off, voice sugary. Too sweet, I stepped aside. Come in, then. They walked in like realtors. Eyes scanning walls, corners, papers on the side table. I let them. I made some peach tea, I offered. No sugar yet. Patrick declined. Dana didn't answer. I waited. Let the quiet lean in. Then, When the silence grew too tight, I said, "Why don't we take this outside? Air's cooler under the trees." Patrick hesitated. Dana's fingers curled tighter around her phone. But they followed. We walked in a slow line, me in front, through the back door, down the porch steps, past the hydrangeas Jack planted that never did bloom right. The orchard waited. I didn't say anything as we moved beneath the canopy. The sun flickered between leaves. The wind had started again, gentle this time. At the bench, I stopped, turned, faced them both. Patrick looked older, not tired, just heavier, like guilt left weight in the bones. Dana stepped forward, voice lighter than her eyes. "So," she said, "we heard you've been busy." I didn't respond. Let the breeze fill the gap. She crossed her arms. "You went to Harold Corwin." Not a question. A confirmation. I raised an eyebrow. "Did I?" Patrick cleared his throat. "Look, Mom, it's not that we don't respect your independence." Dana cut in. "It's just, you're not thinking clearly about what's best in the long run." "For who?" I asked. Neither answered. Behind us, a squirrel scrambled through the branches, knocking loose a half-ripe plum. It landed with a soft thud. No one moved. And somewhere, between that fruit hitting soil and the silence that followed, I realized they hadn't come to talk. They'd come to take something back. But some things, once given away, don't fit back in your hands. Patrick stepped forward first. "Mum," he said, softer now. "We didn't come to argue." I tilted my head. "Then what did you come for?" He glanced at Dana. She didn't meet his eyes. "We were surprised," he said, "to hear about the changes. The will, the bank." Dana's voice cut through. "You froze the operating account." I turned slowly to look at her. "You noticed." She stepped toward me, eyes sharp now. "There was no warning. You've put us in a very difficult position." "For whom?" I asked again. Same question. Still no answer. Patrick lifted a hand like he was calming a child. "Let's not make this a standoff. We're family." I looked at my son. The man Jack used to carry on his shoulders. The boy who once cried when he broke a plum branch clean off. Who begged me not to tell his father. And now here he was. A clean shoes, trembling voice, trying to dress theft in concern. I said nothing. Dana filled the silence. "You don't understand how complicated this gets. The taxes alone." "Then learn," I said, calm, even. She blinked. Patrick tried again. "Mom, we thought you trusted us." "I did," I said. "Once." They both stilled. The wind lifted Dana's scarf. Somewhere, a gate creaked on its hinge. The orchard stood silent. Then, footsteps on the grass. We turned. Nathan, he approached slowly, an envelope in his hand. Familiar, unmistakable. My handwriting on the front. He looked only at me. "Grandma," he said, "I think this was meant for now." He handed it over without explanation. No drama, no eye contact with his parents. Just a quiet handoff. Dana stared. Patrick's mouth opened, then closed. I held the envelope, didn't open it. Didn't need to. "I've said what I needed," I told them. They stood there, as if waiting for me to take it all back. But some things, once set in motion, don't return to stillness. Some things grow deeper roots because of the storm. I turned to Nathan. "Walk me back." He nodded. We left them standing beneath the trees they no longer recognized. If your own family ever made you feel like age meant weakness, you're not alone. Share your story below. And subscribe if you believe wisdom deserves a voice. The bank was quiet at 9:05. Just the hum of overhead lights and the soft shuffle of paper behind the glass. I walked in holding the manila folder like it weighed more than it did. A young man at the counter greeted me. Polite. Unfamiliar. But then, from the side office, a voice I remembered. "Mrs. Reynolds." I turned. Marta. She'd been working at First Farmers since the year Jack and I bought the orchard. Her hair was shorter now. Gray where it used to be honey. But the kindness was still there. She gestured me in. Closed the door gently behind us. No rush. No small talk. I placed the folder on her desk. She opened it with care. Power of attorney revocation. Account closure forms. New beneficiary declarations. All neat. All signed. Marta didn't blink. just nodded slowly as she scanned. We'll finalize the disassociation today, she said. By end of business, the Reynolds farm account will list only you. And the legacy trust? I asked. She tapped the screen. Your grandson's name is already attached. Effective immediately. He'll receive notifications only if something changes. I exhaled, not relief, but confirmation. Marta leaned back, folded her hands. Jack would have done the same, she said softly. He always read every line twice. I smiled, 3 times, if it was legal. She chuckled. We moved through the rest quietly. Initial here, sign there, print and review. No questions, no hesitations. When it was done, Marta reached into a drawer and pulled out a small envelope. Inside, my copy, stamped. Final. She slid it across the desk. I'm required to ask. Would you like to send notice to the removed parties? No, I said. They'll feel it soon enough. She nodded again. Didn't press. I stood, gathered my things. Paused with my hand on the doorknob. Marta, I said. Yes? Did Jack ever tell you the story about the neighbor's cow? She grinned. Only every time he came in. We laughed, real and brief. Then I walked out. Into the cold sun of a Tuesday morning. The wind sharp enough to wake the skin, the air holding no scent of regret. Only paper, dust, and cut grass from the city crew trimming hedges. Nothing grand had happened in that building. No gable, no headlines. But the power had shifted, and no one but me needed to know it. I got home just before noon. Didn't take off my shoes. Didn't hang up my coat. I walked straight through the kitchen, past the radio still murmuring about rainfall, and out the back door. The orchard greeted me like it always did, us unbothered, unmoved by banks or signatures. It asked nothing, but gave everything. I walked row by row until I reached the west edge, where the fence sagged and the light came in at an angle. The old pruning shears waited on the post. Rusty, stiff. I picked them up anyway. Found a low, hanging branch, purple plums full and nearly ready. I snipped a small stem, one fruit still clinging. Then I turned back toward the shed. Inside, in a box marked, Tax, OLD, beneath receipts and oil-stained envelopes, was a green cloth ledger. The one Jack used before we went digital, before Patrick started helping. The last dozen pages were notes, loans, favors, checks that never came back. Half of them had Patrick's name beside the numbers. I didn't read them. I stepped outside, ledger under one arm, the plum branch in my other hand. By the stone fire ring Jack built with Nathan one summer, I lit a match. The paper caught slowly. Then all at once, I watched the flame eat through old ink and dried glue, curling years into ash. When it was gone, I placed the plum branch on top, a small offering. Not for forgiveness, not for forgetting. Just release. The smoke curled upward, toward a sky too blue to carry anything heavy. That evening, I made stew, thick, savory, salted more than I meant to. Nathan arrived just before 7, hair damp, eyes clearer than I'd seen in weeks. He sat without asking. I ladled 2 bowls, sliced bread, set the butter out. We didn't speak much. Didn't need to. Halfway through, he wrinkled his nose. This is really salty, he said. I laughed, loud and sudden. He blinked, then grinned. I mean, it's good, he added quickly. I waved him off. Jack used to say if the stew makes you sip slow, you'll stay longer. He nodded. Tore off another piece of bread. The kitchen felt fuller than it had in months. Not crowded, just filled in. Even the shadows seemed softer. After dinner he helped with the dishes. No words, no music. Just clinks and water. When he left, he didn't take the back door. He kissed my cheek, said, "Night, Grandma," and left by the front, like he belonged there. I stayed up an hour longer, wrote nothing, checked nothing, just sat with my tea, letting silence settle in again. But this time it wasn't lonely. It was earned. The phone rang just after breakfast. I knew it was her before I picked up. No one else called from a number that clean. Just area code and digits, like something made in a boardroom. Elaine, Dana said. Not hi, not good morning. Just my name, clipped and tight. We're not done. I stirred my tea. Let the spoon clink once before setting it aside. I think we are, I said. There was a pause. Not of confusion, of calculation. "You've made this harder than it needed to be," she said. "I hope you know that." I didn't respond. Just watched the steam rise from my cup. She kept going. "You might think you've won something, but this isn't over. Families that tear themselves apart don't get to feel righteous. Families that tear others apart," I said calmly, "don't get to feel surprised when someone stands up." Another pause. Then, click. No goodbye. No closing. I sat for a moment, listening to the quiet that came after her. Then I reached for my boots. The rain had passed during the night, but the ground was still soft, spongy underfoot. I walked out through the back gate, the latch squealing like always. Didn't fix it. Let it complain. Halfway into the orchard, I saw it. One of the middle trees had cracked. Split down the center, the trunk open like a wound. The storm had done it. Wind, pressure, time. One gust too many. I knelt beside it. Ran my fingers along the exposed grain. It wasn't rotting. Just broken. Sometimes that's all it takes. Not decay. Just the wrong force at the wrong time. I stood again. Didn't rush. I wouldn't replace it. Jack used to say, if a tree goes down fighting, you leave it. You let the others learn. I looked around. The rest stood strong, dripping with rain, heavy with promise. I walked the perimeter slowly, checking the fence, watching the light catch puddles and glint off leaves. And I thought, she can call, she can threaten, she can rattle every empty chain in her closet. But storms don't scare roots. They just reveal them. The letter came wrapped in blue. Not a legal envelope. A linen fold, hand-addressed, elegant in that cold way corporate things pretend to be warm. I opened it with a butter knife. Jack always used the edge of his thumbnail. I never could. Inside, 2 pages. The first was formal, typed, full of neutral phrasing. Harold's office confirmed the following power of attorney revoked. Family trust restructured. Estate directives updated to reflect new guardianship terms. And finally, in bold, the handwritten codicil to Mr. Reynolds's original will has been authenticated and recorded. My breath caught there. Not because I was surprised, because someone had seen it. Someone other than me. Jack's handwriting, slanted and blue, inked. His note about the orchard. About Nathan. I laid the paper on the table like it might bruise. Ran my hand down the side, palm open, steady. The second sheet was a personal note from Harold's assistant. Brief, polite. If there's anything else we can do, don't hesitate. I smiled at that. There wasn't anything else to do. Not for them. But for me, I opened my laptop. Typed slow. Not because I couldn't move fast, but because I wanted each word to feel like a stone placed in the right place. R2 Marta R. Subjecta thank you Tor Marta. Tor I know it's rare to get notes like this. Tor but I needed you to know. Tor you helped more than you think. Tor not just with the forms or the folders. Tor with the quiet. Tor with the knowing. Tor with the kindness you didn't rush. Tor I've spent too many years letting others talk louder. Tor you didn't raise your voice. Tor you just waited. Tor and that changed everything. Tor thank you. Tor Elaine Reynolds I hit send. No edits, no rereads. Just truth. The kind that doesn't need punctuation to land. I shut the laptop. Turned toward the window. The orchard shimmered in the late light. Still soaked, still standing. Then the phone rang. I let it ring twice. Picked up on the third. Grandma, Nathan said. His voice was dry, tense. She's not done. That was all. And it was enough. It came in a square envelope. Heavy stock. Too fancy for good news. The return address wasn't Dana's house. It was the gallery. The one she used to joke about. I'd never sell something I couldn't hang straight, she'd say. Now here it was. Official embossed and trimmed in gold. I opened it slowly. The invitation was thick, perfumed faintly like lavender. Script letters curled across the page as Seckers. You are warmly invited to the opening of Second Row Gallery, a celebration of vision, resilience, and family legacy. My name was handwritten in the corner. Ink thick, forceful, and below that, family expected. I read that line twice, then a third time. I didn't feel anger. Not even insult. Just the same dull weight I'd carried since the day Dana started correcting me in front of strangers. I left the invitation on the table. Walked down the hall. Carpet soft under bare feet. Jack's old room still smelled faintly like cedar. Dust drifted across the dresser untouched in months. The desk sat in the corner. Top drawer stuck a little, as always. Inside pens, batteries, a rubber band so old it cracked when I touched it. Beneath it all a small envelope. No stamp, just my name, written in Jack's slope. It wasn't sealed. I unfolded the page. The handwriting thinned at the edges, but the words held. Toi Elaine, Tor bar. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say it out loud. Tor, but I meant to. Torn. You held this family together longer than anyone knew. Tor, you taught them roots while I showed them bricks. Tor tar, I hope when the time comes, you stand tall. Tor, even if they don't see it yet. Tor, don't let them rewrite it. How Tor. Torgetch, I read the last line again. Then closed my eyes. The letter stayed in my lap, the room gone still as breath. From the kitchen, the clock ticked toward noon. And in that quiet, I decided I would go. I wore Jack's jacket. Brown canvas, frayed at the collar. He used to joke it was older than Dana. It still smelled like cedar and motor oil. The drive to the gallery was quiet. Spring sun through the windshield, radio off. Thoughts louder than traffic. I parked 2 blocks away. Didn't want to fuss with valet. Didn't want to announce. The building was glass and white beams, modern in that curated, chilly way. Inside, laughter rose like champagne bubbles, sharp, fleeting, a little too much. I didn't go to the front row. Didn't want to sit under spotlights. I stayed near the back wall, near the coat check, watched. Dana moved like she owned the air. Long dress, dark green, hair pinned up. She greeted donors. Hugged people with practiced warmth. When she spotted me, her eyes flickered, only for a second. Then she turned to shake someone's hand. A staff member walked by with a guestbook. Hardcover, leather-bound, cream pages. I asked if I could sign. He nodded. I pulled out Jack's letter. Folded small, edges soft from rereading. Slipped it between 2 pages. Wrote 1 line beneath X. Don't let them rewrite it. Dab singed of Elaine Reynolds. No flourish, no speech. Dana stepped up to the mic. Lights shifted. Tonight is about vision, she began. About what we build from what we inherit. Applause. I didn't stay for the toast. Outside, the air was cooler. I walked past the parked cars, the soft click of heels behind me, the echo of a man's cough in the alley. I didn't look back. Back at the house. The orchard shimmered in dusk light. 1 broken tree still leaning, still whole in its way. I hung up the jacket. Turned off the porch light. Let the night settle around me, like a blanket finally shared. The day after the gallery opening, I woke with no alarms. Just sunlight through linen curtains, and the soft creak of old floorboards as I made my way to the kitchen barefoot. Coffee. Toast. The sound of wind brushing the screen door. No noise from lawyers. No apology emails. No invitations. And no need. I sat by the window where Jack used to read, watched a squirrel attempt the bird feeder. Watched it fail twice, then succeed. The guest book was probably still sitting on a table in that gallery. My letter folded between those glossy pages, just out of sight. It didn't matter if Dana found it. Or if she didn't. I hadn't left it for her. I'd left it for the part of her that still remembered how we planted the pear tree together. The part that once cried when her hamster died. The part that stopped writing to me after Jack's funeral, but still kept the postcard I sent from Vermont in '03. Some things, I've learned, aren't meant to be argued. Only witnessed. I used to think being right meant being loud. Getting the last word. Proving it on paper. But legacy, I've learned, has its own rhythm. It's in the drawer you never open until one day you need what's inside. It's in the letter someone finds after you're gone, and the smell of your hand lotion on the envelope stops them in their tracks. It's in the way you say nothing when others expect you to explode. I didn't explode. I didn't show up with a lawyer or a microphone. I showed up in Jack's jacket, stood near the guest book, and left a sentence they can never erase. That was enough. That was everything. I spent the morning in the garden. The shovel was heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I was just slower now. Not weak, just more careful. Jack used to tease me for naming the plants. I'd touch each tomato sprout and whisper, "You better behave this year, Clara." Clara was still here. So was George the basil, and Betty the stubborn rosebush that never bloomed when I wanted it to. I didn't garden for food anymore. Not really. I did it for rhythm. The pull of weeds, the press of damp earth, the way dirt got under my nails and stayed even after scrubbing. At noon, I took a break on the porch. Tea warm between my palms, birds arguing in the eaves. That's when I noticed the envelope, not in the mailbox, on the porch swing, no stamp. Just my name, in pen. I opened it slowly. Familiar slant, Nathan. His handwriting had always looked like it was trying too hard not to slant left. "Tor grandma. Tortors, I saw what you wrote in the guest book. Tortar, I know it was yours. Tortar, I just wanted to say thank you. Tor not for taking sides. Tor but for protecting what's real. Thajal, I think you did more than you know. True Tor Twavlov, Torva Nathan." I stared at the words until they blurred. Not from sadness. From something softer. You wait so long to be heard that when someone finally hears you, you don't know how to receive it. I folded the letter, pressed it to my chest, and closed my eyes. The world didn't change. Dana wouldn't change. There'd be no teary reconciliation. But Nathan saw me, saw Jack, saw the shape of what was almost erased. That was enough. We don't always get justice with noise. Sometimes it comes quietly, through a hand-delivered note on a porch swing on a warm spring day. And if you blink, if you're rushing, you might miss it. But if you've lived enough, been humbled enough, you know when to pause. I sipped my tea and smiled at the dirt still under my nails. Legacy doesn't ask for thanks. It just asks that you leave something true behind. I wrote the letter that evening. Not for Dana, not for Nathan, not even for Jack. I wrote it for the version of me who almost said nothing, who almost let silence pass as kindness. The house was quiet, just the soft hum of the fridge and the wind teasing the kitchen window. I pulled out the good stationery, thick paper, pale blue. Jack used to joke it felt like writing on a cloud. I used the fountain pen he gave me on our 25th anniversary. Still smooth, still a little leaky. Dear Elaine. Start with that. Write to the woman who stood still too long, who thought patience would mend what resentment broke. Tell her, Tor, you don't owe anyone your silence, Tor, just to be called kind. Tor, kindness isn't the absence of truth. Torgar, it's the way you carry it. Tor, quietly, yes. Tor, but not invisibly. Tor, I in love. Tor, real love. Tor never asks you to shrink. I paused, sipped water, let that line breathe. Then I folded the letter, tied it with twine, and placed it in the wooden box beside my wedding photo. In the same box, Jack's pen. The first grocery list we wrote as husband and wife. A dried leaf from our orchard. A photo of Dana, age 7, covered in paint and joy. And now, a letter to myself. Not for anyone else's eyes. Not meant to be found right away. Legacy, I've learned, isn't always what you leave behind for others. Sometimes, it's what you leave behind for the next version of yourself. I closed the box, slid it back into the cabinet. No label, no sign, just a box that waits, for the right moment, for the right hands. Outside, the porch light flicked on. A moth danced in the halo of it. Inside, I washed the ink from my fingers and hummed an old tune Jack used to play on the porch. Soft, aimless. The kind that fills a house without asking for applause. I didn't need an audience. I needed peace. And I'd found it. If you've ever chosen quiet over chaos, not because you were weak, but because you were finally done proving, tell me your story in the comments. And subscribe if you believe we don't owe anyone our silence, just to be called kind.